Hello and welcome. This is an important discussion. Speaking about understanding and doing the right things with respect to workplace mental health has always been important, but it's changed a bit. You know, from a while back, and not too long ago, the big focus was on making sure that we supported people who are on disability leave, that we were able to get them back to health and productivity as quickly as possible, that we had prevention strategies to prevent people from going on disability leave and using high-cost medications, et cetera. And that all is still very important, but the conversation is bigger now. The conversation is broader now and more significant to business leaders. What you've been hearing a lot, what I've been hearing a lot, is people's recognition that what makes the difference between an organization that thrives and an organization that languishes is the mental well-being of their people. The innovation that they bring, the collaboration between people, helping one another, good customer service. You can have great technology, but if your people aren't engaged to be able to use that technology to do the things that make a difference for your business, to differentiate in the marketplace, then where are you? That's the conversation right now. Definitely supporting people who are severely compromised, but also making sure that the entire workplace is at the top of their scale. Now, with everything, one needs to understand what's going on before you can make any impact. You can't manage what you do not measure. And we know that over the past while, and this predated that big issue that we had over the last 3 years, which is the pandemic, there has been a change in the mental health in the population. You've seen the fast-paced environment create anxiety, people being overwhelmed. We've seen a trend towards isolation, and isolation is a very, very big deal because as human beings, we are wired to need each other. When we have a sense of social support, our stress goes down. So all of these things have been trending for quite some time, but now it is markedly different. Over the past 3 years, going through change and uncertainty and increased isolation, all the things that the human mind does not like, it has actually reset our collective mental health, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means and what that looks like in the workplace. And without question, when you've had this kind of a change, your productivity is impacted, in particular the kind of productivity that I just spoke about, the kind of productivity that really makes a difference between an organization that thrives and one that does not. Very importantly, we have also seen more challenges in younger workers. And we're not just talking about the youngest workers. We're not just talking about people who are entering their career. There's all sorts of angst in that stage of life, but this is not a stage of life issue. This is a cohort issue. We have the evidence that basically says, with everything that has been happening in our society, younger individuals are feeling the brunt of it much more, and it's continuing as they grow older. Most importantly, however, we are not going to be passive. We don't need to be passive. All of this needs to be understood very clearly, but all of it can be addressed. So a lot of the information I'm going to share with you today comes from the TELUS Health Mental Health Index. And to let you know a little bit about it, well before the pandemic, we recognized that there was a gap in the marketplace. We needed to have something that was relevant to the workplace population, that was easy to understand, that looked at people, not only those who use benefits and services, but the entire population, and that was real time. We have a lot of data that makes things more complicated for us, and that's what we didn't want. So we spent 3 years developing and validating this instrument and making sure that we had good benchmarks. So we have a lot of information from 2017 to 2019 in terms of the mental health and well-being of the working population. And we have information on a monthly basis after that. Now, this is a validated tool. It's not only used by employers and used by our partners and used by organizations, but it's also been leveraged by governments because it is substantial in the insights that it provides. One thing we know for sure is that the mental health of the population declined dramatically at the beginning of 2020. All the things that I had mentioned to you have impacted us. The other thing that is true is that there hasn't been that much improvement since. Our mental health has been reset. So everything that we were going through wasn't just a one-time thing. It wasn't just an incident. It changed our experience for 2.5 to 3 years. It engaged us in a different way. We started to relate to each other a little bit differently. We started to think a little bit differently. And for you, it might not be a whole lot. For others, it was a lot. For the working population overall, it is significant. And just to give you a sense of what that looked like, it didn't happen all at once. In the very beginning, we had all the change that created anxiety. We saw people who had moderate mental health issues move into crisis. People who didn't have necessarily significant mental health issues start to actually experience that. The isolation that we experienced was tremendously impactful because as human beings, we need each other. That's how we are made. That's how we developed. If you look at human history, at a certain point in time, at most points in time, if you did not have a tribe, a community, a group that supported you, you died. You didn't have protection. You didn't have food. You didn't have anyone to depend on. And that was a major risk. So we are wired to need other people. And even though we don't necessarily need other people in the same way that we did then, our need is still part of us. And when we have isolation, it compromises our physical health, cardiovascular, immune system concerns, as well as our mental health. And that happened big time for our population. We also had a lot of us, particularly those who were leaders and parents, who had a lot to do, and we needed to do it, and we had the adrenaline, and we had to get things done, and we did it, and we did it, and we did it because there was no option. Then 6 to 12 months later, what did we feel? Well, we felt exhausted. Of course we felt exhausted. How could we not feel exhausted? Adrenaline is not made to be running through our veins 24/7 every single day for our lives. It wasn't possible not to have that emotional exhaustion. That's what we had. That's when we started to see burnout. But we also started to see new coping patterns, some of them great. People exercised, did wonderful things, some of them not so great. You know, people started to lash out at each other a little bit, people started to drink a little bit more. Where we are right now is on edge. Think about that for a second. Think about what you're hearing in the news. Think about your experience and what's been happening in public transport. Think about just the interpersonal communications in workplaces, some of the responses that people have had around going into the office versus not going into the office. Yes, there's differences of opinion, but there is a lot of edge in the way that we've been communicating with each other. So we're seeing this anger, we're seeing the cynicism, we're seeing this sensitivity to stress. And all of the things that I'd mentioned before, the isolation, it's still with us. 6 out of 10 of us still are more comfortable with less social interaction. The exhaustion, the burnout, the new coping behaviors, that's still with us. And we're moving into this period of edge. So a little bit more about what that looks like. Before the pandemic, we had 12% of the working population that was considered high risk in terms of their mental health. Now, in our definition of high risk, it's when you are in a situation where there is vulnerability. The way you're relating to the world, the way you're taking in information, the way you're behaving is not what you would want and not optimized. And people who have a diagnosis, you know, anxiety, depression, many of you have diagnoses and it's well controlled. That's not what we consider high risk. But many of you might have a diagnosis or know people who do, and it's not well controlled. It's interfering with their quality of life. Those individuals we considered high risk. There's many more who don't have what we call a diagnosis, but they're trending in that direction. That went from 12% of the working population. And again, I stress working because in our data, we only look at people who are working. It would be higher if we included people on disability leave. It's 12% in 2019, 34% right now, April of 2023. We've also seen a fourfold increase in high-risk drinking behavior. So that's when people are drinking 15 drinks or more a week every week. And the reason why we use that measure is that's the point at which you might not have started because you were depressed or you had a substance use issue, but it is the point where the behavior itself can lead to a substance use disorder. However it started, whether it started because your friends are doing it or whether it started because you were self-medicating because of anxiety or depression. 15 drinks or more per week every week is also the level where you start to see changes in your brain, actual cognitive changes. You start to see tremors. You start to see things that are physically indicative of dependence. So not a light measure, and it's gone up fourfold. And that is, as of today, April of 2023. Early in the pandemic, it was even higher and is now settled at 8%. So this is a concern because this is your population. This is the population of your clients. This is the risk that we are facing right now. And as those who have careers supporting the well-being in the workplace, it's important for us to know this so we can address it. Now, many of you, especially if you yourself are between 50 and 59, you might have seen that other little point that the biggest increase was in that age group. And that really just shows us what I mentioned before, that it is not necessarily just self-medicating. There's many reasons that people can move into this risk. And at this period of time, during the pandemic, for this age group, when we looked deeper into it, we actually found that it just happened as a result of boredom, as a result of drinking being more normalized. It didn't happen because people were in any kind of crisis, but that extra drink was really just something that was more common in our society. And those between 50 and 59 tended to be secure in their career, adapted quite well to work from home, maybe didn't have young children to pay attention to, had the time. It's the exact same phenomenon that we see when people retire early, but they don't have a plan. So again, remember, risk in terms of drinking doesn't necessarily start with depression. In many cases it does. In many cases it starts with anxiety, but the behavior itself can create the risk. The other thing is the sensitivity to stress. 46% of us are feeling more sensitive to stress. And we see it in others as well, but where you see it the most is if you have clients who have employees who deal with the public, who serve coffee, who are making transitions in a bank, anybody who is dealing directly with the public, their numbers are much higher in terms of what they're perceiving in others. The little bit of anger, the little bit of cynicism is impacting them not only the same way that it's impacting all of us, but they're also getting it from the population that they serve. There's an added risk to those groups and an added conversation that we need to have to the employers who have groups who serve the public directly. And now you might ask why. And I can tell you why. We actually predicted this. When you are under strain for a long period of time, what gets engaged is the part of your brain that is the fight or flight response. That's meant to be engaged for short periods of time. You react and then you move on, and the issue goes away, and then you return to normal. When it's engaged over a long period of time for whatever reason, and the change, uncertainty, isolation, everything that we experienced over the pandemic engaged us in this fight or flight. We were looking for risk, we were looking for different things, we had more conflict about issues. All of that really engaged that part of our brain and kind of locked it. And we also kind of had a fight for energy with the part of your brain that is responsible for empathy and emotional control. So the fight or flight became more the norm, the empathy and emotional control dampened. Now, of course, this is reversible, but none of what I'm telling you is reversible if we just wait and hope. That's not a strategy. As a matter of fact, when thinking about this and actually speaking to some organizations, I'm reminding of the Stockdale paradox. And that basically says, if you're optimistic and you're just optimistic, you hope that things will be better and you let things play out because of that hope, you are so much more likely to crash, to be disappointed, and in a dire situation, to die. If you are practical about your situation, if you accept the facts as they are, then paradoxically, you have more hope, because understanding gives us a sense of control. It is the first step in control. So we know this is going on. You might see this in yourself, in your families, in others that you work with, but you know this, so you can take action. You can take a beat when you find that tension is getting a little bit high. You can support those around you a little bit more. You can take back control and not just let this path that we're on be the path that continues forever. Now, with all of this, we had the pandemic. We're kind of out of the depths of the pandemic, but we're into a new stage right now. And very recently, what we did is we did a deep dive on financial well-being. And you might ask, why would we do that when we're very concerned about mental health? Well, the fact is that they go together. Your financial well-being is a driver of your mental health, but in very specific ways. The number one thing in our data that we found made a difference in terms of people's mental health was the presence or absence of emergency savings. Now, when you think about that, when you have emergency savings, that gives you a cushion. That gives you a sense of control. Things happen. We know as adults, things go up and down in life. If you have that emergency savings, you have a feeling that you can cope. It gives you a sense of resilience. So regardless of people's incomes, so people who had high incomes but no emergency savings were more vulnerable than people who had more modest income but had some emergency savings, and I'm talking about vulnerability in terms of their mental health. So at this point, we have some strain, and it's impacting the emergency savings. So you see there, 31% of us recently have had to dig into our savings to maintain our standards of living. These are working people. Our data is only working individuals. 31% having to dig into their savings, that cushion that gives them that sense of emotional control in order to maintain their standard of living. 45% are feeling overwhelmed by debt. Not 45% have debt, 45% are feeling overwhelmed by debt, 41% concerned about the future. And in terms of taking the action that people need to take, we have to think about this too. Because we can provide consultations and trainings and a whole bunch of things, and all of those are good, but people don't necessarily use them. And when we asked why, 1 in 5 said that they were just embarrassed. They felt that as adults, they should have their act together, not knowing or not realizing that most of us had not been schooled on how to manage our financial situation. And even if you have been, sometimes it's just a little bit too close. You have to have someone else. So we have to think about that, because programs that don't require people to self-identify, but help them with emergency savings and help them with their financial well-being is also helpful for mental health. So in the beginning of this presentation, I'd mentioned to you a concern. So not only that we have a change in our mental health, but the younger cohort has been more significantly impacted. And this is a statistically significant difference. We find those under 40, so not super, super young, but younger, twice as likely to have an experience of anxiety, twice as likely to have an experience of helplessness, 1.5 times as likely to have a sense of isolation. So again, a very big deal, because we're seeing people carry that through their lifetime, not have the angst of youth, but carry it because this is a cohort issue. What we've also seen, though, is some things that are positive. We see no difference in the sense of optimism. So we don't have a situation where we have younger individuals who are just morose and feeling negative about everything that's going on in the world, climate change, et cetera, et cetera. No difference in optimism, which is great. But we also see something that's perplexing and perhaps not so great. No difference in perception of one's own mental health. So let's think about that for a minute. If a group has higher anxiety, higher helplessness, more isolation, but they feel that their mental health, when they self-rate it, it's no different than the group who has much less of that. Is that a good thing or not a good thing? I would say it's not, because it says that we're normalizing. You know, one of the things that we know just in general health and health promotion is if the two people closest to you, your two best friends or your family, are overweight, you are statistically more likely to also be overweight and more likely to not be motivated to do anything about it, even if it is impacting your health. It becomes part of your norm. If your environment, if your friends, if your immediate cohort is feeling anxious and depressed, and you sort of see that as the way it is because it feels normal, should you not do something about it? We're not talking about stigmatizing people, absolutely not. We're talking about people taking control of their own health and realizing that it could be better in both situations, taking control of health and being better. So I would say this no difference is actually a negative indicator. Now, a few things that we saw that were fascinating. We actually saw that the difference in ages in mental health started even before the pandemic, but increased significantly in April of 2020. So we have a 100-point scale, and the difference between age groups was 2 points in 2019. It increased to almost 10 points in 2020. So 9 points was the increase, was the difference. As of the end of the year, it's increased even further, just a bit further, but look at the difference between 2019 and now in the difference in mental health symptoms in the age groups. So we've actually, through this past year, had younger individuals be more impacted and sustain that impact even now. We've also seen it in productivity because, as I said, the type of productivity that really stands out right now requires people to be innovative, collaborative, problem-solving. All of those things are impacted by your mental well-being, your ability to focus. We saw a difference in age groups in 2019, a massive difference in 2020, and it's continuing right now. So again, This is important because if you trend it out and you understand that this is a cohort issue, this will be a larger issue for employers going forward. And you've probably already heard the concern about work productivity and responses that may or may not be right, but I can tell you for sure that they're not complete. Getting people back into the office is not going to solve what I'm showing you right now, because it's not a matter of your environment. It is a matter of the impact that we've had over the last couple of years on our mental health. That is what needs to be addressed. Now, the other thing is there is sometimes a thought that younger individuals might want more work-life balance. They might be a little bit more self-indulgent, to not have as much of the drive to succeed. All of that is categorically false. We've not seen any of that in our data whatsoever. Ambition, discretionary effort, the productivity when people are feeling well is absolutely no difference. What we saw a difference in is the number of days that people were feeling unwell, the number of days where you felt that procrastination, the number of days where you felt that lack of focus was greater. That was the difference, the number of days unwell. So again, this adds to us understanding what we need to address. We need to address this as a health issue, not a workplace issue. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering why. And I'll tell you a couple of things. Well, first thing I want to sort of just get off the table is the whole idea of stigma. So many people say, well, we're seeing more issues in the younger generation now because there's less stigma. People are talking about it a little bit more. I'll show you a stat in a moment that really challenges that. But when you speak to a university president, and they'll talk about the number of crisis situations that they deal with in the population compared to a few years ago, then you'll understand that it's not really stigma. Being hospitalized isn't dampened by stigma. You're in a crisis state. You don't think about what others are thinking. That has gone up. When you look at the data in terms of how people are experiencing the world, even from prior to working age, teenage and younger, you can strip out the stigma. You can look at what the actual experience is, and you see a difference. So it's not just lower stigma. One of the things that we do know makes a difference, and I'd mentioned this before, and I'm mentioning it again because it's important, is relationships. And younger individuals are less likely to have good relationships with everyone, family, friends, coworkers. We even find something interesting that, with a lot of the anxiety and comparisons and things that people have been experiencing when they're growing up, we find that younger individuals are actually less open. The new ones coming into the workforce right now are less open to doing things as a team. They prefer to work on things individually. So yeah, you can take care of your own business individually, but there is something positive about having collaborative experiences. They're also less likely or more likely to indicate strained relationships with friends. And again, speak to people. Sometimes when you're describing the friend relationships and the person is older, it feels much different when they're younger. This is a societal issue, but it impacts our health, but it also impacts our workplace. Younger workers are also less likely to feel a sense of acceptance and connection with friends. So again, the nature of friendships over time has been feeling different. It's been feeling more transactional. It hasn't been feeling as safe. So a lot of these things didn't start with the workplace, but we know workplaces that are supportive, workplaces where positive team interaction happens. All of these things that can happen in the workplace can counterbalance some of what's happening in society. Now, this is the point that I wanted to show you about stigma. When we asked individuals whether they felt comfortable discussing their mental health with family and friends, we found virtually no difference in those under and over 40. And this was not only Canada. I'm showing you Canadian data, but we found this in 14 different countries. No difference in age groups. Different sometimes by country, but none by age group. And again, think about it. When you're growing up, if you were older, there might have been a period of time that people didn't talk. And that was your experience then. But this is your experience now. People evolve, people adapt. It's just like a number of years ago, there was a lot of discomfort with technology, but guess what? Regardless of your age, people are more comfortable with technology now. So more comfortable and the same level of comfort between younger and older individuals speaking to friends and family. But where the stigma makes a difference is quite interesting. It's in the workplace. Younger workers are more likely to perceive that there would be compromised negatively in terms of their career opportunities if the workplace knew they had a mental health condition. So think about that. It's not that they necessarily would discriminate against anyone else. It's not that they had issues talking to friends or family, but they are looking at workplaces and saying, I don't trust you. That's the issue. Now that's a big deal because when people do not trust, it compromises their behavior. We know that when people perceive stigma, then they are less likely to get help. If they don't trust the employer, if there isn't communication, if there isn't, authenticity in saying, we're not going to impact you negatively. We want you to get help. We are open in talking about mental health. If they don't perceive that as being real, they are less likely to seek help. They're less likely to use the services that we all know that are helpful for people. So younger individuals are less likely to trust the workplace when it comes to stigma. They're more likely to perceive stigma in the workplace, but this is something that workplaces can do something about. So at this point, I went through a number of points, and putting it all together, let's talk about what employers should be doing now. The number one piece of good news is that what employers do makes a difference. It makes a big difference. So when we looked at employees in our data set, not everybody had that huge decline. Some didn't. And when we looked at different groups, there were a number of different factors, but one of the factors that made a difference between those who did better through this past period and those who did not was visible support from their employer for their mental health. This is what we need to shout through the rooftops to make sure that all organizations know they are not passive in this situation. 7 points better than the average. And when you compared organizations who did nothing to support mental health and those who did, 15 points different on a 100-point scale. That's huge. That shows a difference in risk. That shows a difference in likelihood for disability. And it wasn't that people did some things that were extraordinary. They invested in services. They added more services. They trained their managers. They communicated about mental health. They made sure that this driver of physical health, of work productivity, of quality of life was the focus, and it paid off. Now, when you look in terms of support for mental health, there's really 3 big buckets. One of the most basic is policies and practices, compliance to risk management, like anti-harassment policies, making sure that you're accommodating people, all of that, really foundational. And then there's the benefits and services. So the things that are there to respond when you have an issue, but also the things that can positively impact your mental health and well-being. But we can't forget the third either, which is culture and leadership, which is your work experience. Work-life separation has always been a bit of a myth. When you are working, the hours that you are working are as much a part of your life as the hours that you're not working. And your experience at work can be a positive and be healthy and make you better than you were before, or it can do the opposite. So it makes sense for us to use each and every one of these levers. When we asked employees about what they saw as really important, it wasn't the harassment, it wasn't the accommodation policies, it wasn't those things that impact a small number of people that they said, but employees felt that flexible work made a big difference. Now, flexible work is truly flexible work. It's not just working from home. Even people who cannot have the opportunity to work from home based on the nature of their work, they just wanted the ability to step away from their job to deal with something of a personal nature just for a period of time when needed and not feel guilty about it. When people were asking for flexible work, yeah, they were also thinking about work from home, but they were also thinking about, I have a different way of doing my job. I don't want to be micromanaged. I want to make sure that I have some autonomy. There's a lot of things in that flexible work beyond what we're all talking about right now, which is work from home. But that's what employees really called out as important to them. The other thing that employees called out as important is increased services and resources to help them deal with mental health and promotion of those services and resources, because people forget. If you think of if you're buying something, when we were buying a car, we saw the ads over and over and over and over and over and over and over again before we decided to make that decision. You almost needed to sink in and have that time that when it's absolutely the best time for you to make a decision, and you don't know when that is for everybody. So the communication has to be marketed just like everything else in life is marketed. And then the culture and leadership, mental health communications, and manager training. So employees actually called out manager training because of two reasons. One is they said, if the workplace is investing to train my manager to support my well-being, that's amazing. That is so authentic. You're putting money and time into my leader for my benefit. But on a practical level, we've also seen organizations that train their managers. It takes stress off the manager because they know how to deal with situations. They become better managers, but they also know how to appropriately step in when somebody is struggling and not either hide, which can make things worse, or say things that can cause a problem. We don't have this innately, and being a good person doesn't mean that you're a good manager when it comes to necessarily managing mental health in the workplace. It has to be trained. So in all of that, so I mentioned all of these points. I'm going to double down a little bit on benefits. Flexibility is important, and there's a lot of rhetoric right now that says flexibility is the most important thing, but we went right to employees and asked them. And you know what they told us, regardless of whether they were over or under 40, was that to them, the number one thing was the benefits and services. That was the number one reason why they would stay with an employer that they are with right now, is benefits and services that support their health and well-being. Flexibility was important, I'm not taking away, but we cannot forget the role that we play in facilitating not only what's good for people, but what they see as valuable and what helps them be longer-term employees as opposed to cyclical employees. Looked at it another way, we actually asked the hard question. If you think these benefits are so important, if you think support for your well-being is so important, what would you prefer, that or a 10% increase in salary? And we asked this during the height of inflation. And more than what we thought chose the better support for well-being, which shows you how important it is. But what's most important about what I'm showing you right now is that a higher proportion of those under 40 chose the better support for well-being. And the reason is, I actually think that we're becoming smarter. The younger employees are smarter. They realize that when you're talking about your quality of life, that is important. Support for your well-being is more important in many cases to your quality of life than the 10%, half of which goes into taxes. Your work experience is part of your life experience, and making sure that's solid is an important decision in who you want to work for. So your clients need to know this, because they need to know how powerful the work we're doing to support mental well-being is, not only for direct health reasons, but also for straight up business reasons, retention, attraction. We have the evidence. Now, the other thing is we want to understand what people will engage in. And what we found is, it was interesting, 1 in 2, a little bit more under 40, a little bit less over 40, but on average, 1 in 2 employees said that they would be interested in a free confidential mental health assessment. And when I brought this to clients, they say, what, like, we have that available. Why don't people use it? Not 1 in 2 is using it. But do we normalize it? Do employees feel that it is just something that you should do to take care of your health and well-being, like you would see a physician for a checkup or anything of that sort? Or do we make it feel like you have to be, quote unquote, bad enough, that you have to be in some sort of level of crisis before you actually get the assessment to help you figure out what's going on? So I think we can do a better job. We can help normalize taking care of oneself. We can help normalize getting the data on your own well-being. Just like I'm telling you, it's important to have data on your clients, to have data on what's happening overall in the workplace. You cannot improve what you do not measure, and that is important no matter what lens you look at this. Now, the other thing we want to make sure of is that we are always making things as easy as possible and as attractive as possible for people to get support. We still live in a society where there is stigma. Even though it's starting to go away, it's still there. And that's a barrier. We don't need other barriers. So one of the things that we asked is, how do you want that support to be delivered? Because aligning with what people want as their preference is respectful, it is inclusive, and it also helps prevent a barrier. I would never say to someone who is seeking help that you can only get it in one particular way. So this is important, really important, because while digital modalities are effective, we've known this for 20 years, while digital modalities are essential in order to make sure that we have wider access, while digital modalities are always going to be a part of the health ecosystem. At this point, half of people want in-person mental health support, so we need to provide both. There are those who would say that we don't need to provide mental health support for those who are younger if you have a younger demographic. Our data says something different. You need to do your homework. And those who have said that we can get away with having no in-person support have not done their homework. And that's to the detriment of the populations that they service. Now, we also know that what counseling does make a difference. And just to tell you how to interpret this information, people who are going into EAP, they are having emotional distraction that amounts to about, on average, 57 hours a month, 57 hours a month that they are not productive. After EAP, it goes down to about 36. That's a massive increase. So that amounts to 7 weeks of productivity returned. And you would say, why doesn't it go down to 0? Well, none of us are 100% productive. Even if you've never had any issues, it's about 25 to 30% that you're a bit distracted. So this makes a difference. I'll tell you 2 other things that make a difference. We talked about benefits. We talked about flexibility. Now we're going to talk about the workplace. We did a major study as part of our MHI looking at manager traits and the mental health of those managers' teams. And we found certain factors made a difference. Managers who were team-oriented and wanted success for their team as opposed to success for themselves. Managers who were inclusive as opposed to autocratic, showed people respect for their thoughts and opinions. That made a difference. Managers who were kind as opposed to hostile. But also managers who were charismatic and inspiring. Managers who weren't afraid to make decisions. So the basics are the team orientation, the inclusiveness, and the humanity. But those other 2 points are related to the mental well-being of the manager. You are not going to inspire anyone else if you yourself are emotionally distracted. So supporting your managers supports your people as well. The other thing that made a difference was the overall workplace culture. And again, being safe, being respected, again, being supported. If we look across the bottom, all of these things are important. And again, if you don't believe me, think about what it feels like if you're unsafe. You're not sure that what you're saying is going to be negatively viewed. You're not being respected. If you have those experiences, you cannot function at your best no matter who you are. That takes up emotional energy just to feel that you have to self-protect. So again, what workplaces do makes a difference, and these are the things that define a workplace that is healthy. Over and above that, flexible, inclusive, and again, those higher level things, collaborative, motivative, innovative. This is where I was telling you before, it's not just about managing risk, but an organization functioning at the top of their scale in terms of being mentally healthy is not a soft organization. It is an organization that functions well. Now, part of it is that we also know that there's consequences if you don't pay attention to this. Those who didn't have those indicators, they had the opposite. Their people were twice as likely to experience burnout, twice as likely to feel unsettled, and twice as likely to have concerns with alcohol. So this is not pandemic related, this is organizationally related. So we have control, we have influence. We might as well use that influence to do what's best for people as well as best for the organization. One other point. I'd mentioned financial well-being before, and we'd also asked employees about what they value in terms of support for financial well-being. And guess what they said? They just wanted to not think about things too much. And they know savings and investment is important. They also know that it sometimes feels hard. You sometimes get distracted with other things. The number one thing that people asked for was an automatic savings and investment plan. Discounts were important as well, but the automatic savings was the top thing. So again, making things easy for people, that makes a difference. And financial well-being impacts mental well-being. So as we start to wrap up, I'll tell you a couple of other things as takeaways. We have a workplace strategy index for mental health. That's for us, that's for you to use with clients. It helps understand where the organization is on all the things that do make a difference. We did a lot of research in making sure that we understand what organizations can do and the things that really do make a difference in terms of policy, practices, support, as well as culture. So completing this, organizations will get a score. Are you doing well? Are you not doing well? And very specific drill downs into the areas where they might think about doing things a little bit differently or taking another next step, and also how they benchmark against their peers. And from our database, we have several hundred employers who have taken this. It's very interesting. Most organizations are 60, where the average is a 62, which is about a C minus. So there's a lot of opportunity there. We still have a long ways to go, but we're not completely failing. We're still passing. What was astonishing is that the score in the compliance area, these are things that are related to legislation, was only 88. So it was good, but it should have been 100. So an important insight. And in the other areas, definitely areas for improvement. But most organizations, 51%, want to be leading, want to be 80 or above. So we know that organizations want to do better. And our responsibility is to take the data that we're sharing right now, take any other data that you have, show them where to focus, and help them do better. Now, we've taken, as TELUS Health, all of this information to heart. We don't only share it publicly. We want to share it publicly. We want to make sure that you use it. We'll partner with you to use it. But we couldn't sit idly by and not say, wow, there is a change in the health of the population. Employers want to do better. We know that employers can do better, but not enough people are. We need to make it easier. So we took a hard look at what we offer, and we came up with a strong conclusion. One, EAP is strong. EAP helps people. It is valuable in increasing productivity. It provides that safety net. But with this increase in mental health need, we need more. So the way EAP functions, it's short-term solution focus. That's the term, which is you have an issue, you deal with that issue. But more and more people are having ongoing needs, ongoing anxiety, ongoing challenges, which doesn't exactly fit into the EAP model. But everything that's in EAP, the financial services, the well-being services, the legal services, all of that provides so much wraparound that nobody wanted to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so we built on top of it. And you'll hear a little bit more about total mental health, which is not EAP, it's a reimagined experience. All the services of EAP, but we're making sure that people who have a greater need have access to ongoing support. We're making sure that we're not fragmented between EAP and benefits, that there is that continuity and that there is a care navigator that can help make sure that the administration can allow people to continue with the same therapist, even if they need long-term care. We have evidence-based plans, so we know that the care for different situations are customized to the person's needs, but they are always getting best in class in some of the key health issues. So this is total mental health. Many more features to benefit the population. And the way it was built is we looked at everything that the population needs, all the challenges that are being communicated by employers and employees, and we set about to solve that problem. So that's where we are right now. A few takeaways. The reality of the situation is that we have a change in our collective mental health. That change has been happening over a long period of time. We've been seeing more anxiety, more isolation. It's just gotten a little bit more intense over the last little while, and it really hasn't changed that much over the last 3 years. There's a widening of the differences between generations, which tells you that going forward, this is going to be even a bigger issue. We've seen productivity be impacted, and there's so much conversation in employers right now about productivity. Do your employer clients a favor and don't have them just spin around in circles thinking about solving it by bringing people into offices. I have no opinion about that whatsoever, but if you bring people into offices and don't address the core issue, which is the compromise to people's mental health, you're not going to be happy. You're not going to get the outcome you want. We also know that we can do things. We can change this. What I would suggest is make sure that you're taking the opportunity to leverage this data to educate your clients, to have them understand what we understand and what you understand, so they know the situation as it is, unfettered, and they consider the risk of doing nothing. And then 3 simple steps. One is focus on services that are available to people to make them more comprehensive. 2 is promoting workplace training, communications, change management, the things that make a difference in the workplace culture. Because having wonderful services and a poor culture are not going to get you the best outcomes that you could. And not forget about financial well-being. So the services that support that are important in and of themselves for quality of life, but there's no 2 ways about it. it also is a factor in people's mental well-being. So thanks for your time. I hope that you understand the trends. I hope that you accept them, even though not all of them are positive. But I also hope you leave with a clear understanding that the ball is where it is, but we don't have to accept those trends. We can impact them so our outcomes will be better. Thank you.